Areas from the Florida Panhandle to the northeastern coast of Texas are closely watching the track of Hurricane George. It is over the Gulf, and it could intensify before making landfall once again. Good morning and welcome to this edition of Weather Center. I'm Cheryl Lemke. Now, we are closely monitoring the movement of Hurricane George, and Bruce Edwards gives us an update from the Forecast Center. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Cheryl, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, we're watching George and wondering what's next for this hurricane that refuses to go away. It's wreaked havoc in the Caribbean, cruised through the Florida Keys. Now it's out over the open waters of the Gulf, and we're wondering who the next victim is. We look back to Key West, though, where things really were ripped apart by the hurricane yesterday morning as it ripped through the Keys, downing trees, power lines. Reports said that 20 of the 26 houseboats on Houseboat Row were destroyed by the hurricane yesterday. Power outages reported, trees, power lines down. You just can't get through the roadways, and they're starting to get in there this morning, and we'll continue through the day to really give a true assessment of the damage so far. But again, the marinas, as you can see, suffered extensive pounding from the waves as they continue to rip through. Satellite picture right now shows Earl, and quite clearly we can see where the center of Earl is out there, the circulation center out into the Gulf. And it continues to work its way to the west-northwest. As of 5 a.m., the National Hurricane Center reports George, excuse me, when I say Earl, I'm thinking back to the previous hurricane. George was centered at 25.5 north, 84.5 west, or 460 miles southeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. Top sustained winds are still at 105 miles per hour. That's a Category 2 hurricane. It is moving west-northwest at 9. It's expected to maintain that track. Central pressure is holding at 975 millibars. As we mentioned, it's now a Category 2 hurricane with 105-mile-an-hour winds, but as you can see, not much of a bump needed to move it up to Category 3, and there is a favorable strengthening possible later on today as the Gulf waters are warm and there's nothing to hinder its development at the present time. We take a look at the watches and the warnings that are posted across the Gulf coastal region now. Of most importance, from St. Marks, Florida to Morgan City, Louisiana, hurricane watches have been posted at the present time, and we may see these expanded perhaps a little to the west of Morgan City on the Louisiana coast later today, depending upon the track of Earl. But with the latest advisory now, the tropical storm warnings have been discontinued for the west coast of Florida from north of Longboat Key northward. So that's the northernmost reaches of this have been eliminated from the tropical storm warning, but they still continue from the Florida Keys and Key Largo southward, and for the west coast of Florida up to Longboat Key at the present time. We take a look at the wind circulation, and most of the tropical storm force winds are now beginning to pull off the west coast of Florida, but still, as you look down towards the Keys, they're continuing to work their way across, and of course we haven't been able to get many observations at all out of the Key West area because of the impact of Hurricane George, but we can see down around Fort Myers, 22-mile-an-hour wind gust, 26-mile-an-hour wind gust at Miami, Florida. And we're looking at about 30-mile-an-hour gust as you get towards the Key West vicinity. Dr. Steve Lyons joins us right now to take a look at George, and we're watching it. And while the massive structure of the hurricane is not quite as big as it's been, it still looks pretty compact and pretty potent right around the center.
It sure does. A lot of the thunderstorm activity well away from the center is temporarily weakened, and so here you can see on the satellite imagery a well-defined eye is starting to close off there. That weakness on the southwest side we saw earlier is closing in, and now we have a well-defined eye. The overall circulation center, of course, keep in mind, is much larger. We still have 30-knot or 35-mile-per-hour winds here in the southwestern Keys, so the circulation center is really more this size, even though the cloud cover is much smaller. This area of red here would be considered the much stronger wind area, the potential damage area.
All right, we look at the radar that's still affecting southwestern Florida, as you can see from south of Tampa Bay down towards Key West and the Florida Keys. And here again, you can see Key West, Naples, Fort Myers still catching the rain this morning.
And it's some of these thunderstorms that are flaring up in here, producing some very strong winds. Again, when those thunderstorms bring down the faster winds from aloft, you get very gusty winds. So you be very careful if you're out in a marine environment, even up in Naples, Fort Myers, all the way up the coast here. Going to be a blustery day.
If we can talk for a minute about the tides and the surge. Now we're getting mainly some southeasterly winds here blowing offshore, and it's around the time of high tide. But later on this afternoon is when they may get the some beach erosion and some tidal flooding.
That's correct. When the wind comes back around out of the southwest here, you're going to get most of the bigger waves, and that in combination with the piling up of the water along the coast here is going to be probably the maximum water level rise.
Alrighty, once again we take a look at the situation, and we're looking at the influences and where George may be heading, and we see one element that may definitely impact its movement.
Now, this trough over here off the west coast of the United States is rather important because there's a ridge of high pressure in this dark area, and depending on what that ridge does, if it erodes away, it may take a course farther north. If it doesn't erode away, it'll take a course farther west. Right now, that hurricane watch area is a very broad area, but within the next 24 hours or so, that will shrink rather dramatically.
Alrighty, thank you, Dr. Steve Lyons, as we watch and anticipate the movement of Hurricane George. We remind you we'll have another complete update at the bottom of the hour. Now let's check back in with the latest information in the studio with Cheryl Lemke.
Thanks, Bruce. And this edition of Weather Center is sponsored by 1010-321. Well, this morning getting off to a very cool, crisp start over portions of the Pacific Northwest and over portions of New England. And you can definitely see signs that fall is definitely in the air. Our satellite picture showing us that we have more clouds now too coming in across the Pacific Northwest in association with our upper level low, and there have been some scattered showers and especially some big time thunderstorms though rumbling over portions of the upper plain states. You can see from our surface map that we have a very complex low pressure area getting better organized across the Midwest. That will be migrating towards the east, and as it does, showers and thunderstorms will be popping today from Minneapolis and Grand Forks and Fargo, spreading all the way over towards Green Bay, Appleton, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, also for lower Michigan. Now, unfortunately, we have been seeing some of the weather ingredients coming together for severe weather. Quite a bit of low-level moisture feeding northward from the Gulf, the strong dynamic low-pressure system coming in from the west, and a very pronounced jet stream is also slicing right through this region. So again, the weather ingredients are coming together for an outbreak of severe weather. And so far, during the wee hours of the morning, we have had some vicious thunderstorms popping up around the region, and we have had reports of downed trees and power lines and some large hail. And right now, we do have a warning out for Osceola County in Michigan, just to the south of Cadillac. Some severe weather now developing within the last few minutes or so. So again, a large mass of showers and thunderstorms sweeping up.
Once again, residents in the Florida Panhandle and other areas along the Gulf Coast are now boarding up for and also preparing for a possible visit from Hurricane George. Good morning and welcome to the Weather Center. I'm Will Annan. As we monitor the movement from Hurricane George, we're also tracking this possibility of more severe weather today in the upper Midwest and also the northern Great Lakes. More on that in just a moment. First, an update on George. After slamming most of the western part of the Florida Keys yesterday, the hurricane is now on a collision course with the Gulf of Mexico. Again, the big question is, where's it going to be going and where's it going to be making landfall? Well, Bruce Edwards and Dr. Steve Lyons have details right now in the Forecast Center.
Thank you very much, Will, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, we are keeping an eye on George as it has wreaked havoc on the Florida Keys. Now it's moving out over the Gulf of Mexico, and after getting a little bit of discombobulated, it's looking a little better. Dr. Steve Lyons joins us as well, and we were looking at an earlier satellite picture through the overnight hours. It seemed to be a little more disorganized. Now it appears to be really starting to get its act together once again.
It sure is. The deep thunderstorm activity around the circulation center you can see on satellite imagery here. Well-defined eye now. The only part that doesn't have extremely intense convection is just here in the southwestern sector here, but overall it's looking like it's really intensified significantly the last few hours. Now we had a recon out there a little while ago, but we haven't had one in the last hour or so, but it looks like it's going to town now.
Yeah, if you look at it, we start the loop here, it's how small it is, and it's just expanding and filling in, as they say. Well, here's the observations from the National Hurricane Center as of 5 a.m. Eastern Time. The latest report as George centered at 25.5 north, 84.5 west, or 460 miles southeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. Top sustained winds still holding at 105 miles per hour, but there is a possibility of strengthening over the warm Gulf waters later today. It's very, very persistent with that track west-northwest at 9 miles per hour, central pressure 975 millibars. Now, the hurricane watches have been posted along the north coast of the Gulf from Morgan City, Louisiana to St. Marks, Florida. And the good news in the western parts of the Florida Peninsula is that now the tropical storm warnings drop north of Longboat Key, but from Longboat to Key Largo, we still have tropical storm warnings presently in effect. The wind field around the center of the hurricane at the present time is now beginning to move offshore, but it's a pretty expansive field as well.
It sure is, Bruce. You can see the area of tropical storm force winds extends well off the coast of Tampa here, and that's what's generating the large surf that's already up to 10 feet well up in here and 18 feet or higher down in here.
Yeah, it's continuing and it's moving in that northwesterly direction. Here's the radar, and we can see a few heavier storms perched just off Naples, Florida right now, and still the Keys and some pretty good little bands here that we hadn't seen earlier this morning forming.
That's correct, and out here in the Dry Tortugas way out here, they're experiencing about the worst they've seen from the hurricane so far. Tropical storm force winds, and even Naples here could get some gale force or tropical storm force winds, same thing, here within the next hour or two in those thunderstorms.
Well, the Alabama's governor has declared a state of emergency, and they have ordered mandatory evacuations in Baldwin County beginning at 8 a.m. Central Time this morning. And Florida's not going to be caught off guard either. Some 183,000 people have been told to leave for higher ground. One person that is not quite in higher ground yet is the Weather Channel's Kristen Dodd. She's up in Pensacola Beach, Florida, and gives us our first look at the weather there this morning. Good morning, Kristen.
Oh, good morning, Bruce. As you mentioned, several people, thousands of people ordered to leave the barrier islands here. At this point, most of the tourists are gone as the hotels have been boarded up and shut down here at Pensacola Beach, but many of the residents have not left yet. Apparently they're going to be watching the weather today, making their final preparations of their homes, and then heading over the bridge over toward the inland areas. Those evacuation orders were issued last night at 5 o'clock, and they do include the barrier islands here, all of Santa Rosa County, the coastal areas, including Pensacola Beach. We also are seeing Perdido Key under an evacuation order. Also west of here, as you mentioned, for Baldwin County, the governor there in Alabama has issued the evacuation order, and so folks will begin to leave the Gulf Shores area and all of the Pleasure Island area. One note, if you are going to be evacuating early this morning, you need to have plans in place to stay over there. Not only the bridge over here through Pensacola Bay, but also the bridge that leaves out of Gulf Shores will be shut down to incoming traffic once the evacuation does begin. So once you are heading out, that's it. You will not be allowed back in until the all clear is given. At this point, we're just having some gusty winds, the normal morning stuff here. We are expecting the waves to begin to be on the increase as we head through the day. Bruce?
Thanks very much, Kristen Dodd, reporting live from Pensacola Beach, Florida. We'll be checking with Kristen and Dr. Steve Lyons. You mentioned the buoys out there showing 18-foot seas offshore from the Panhandle. A lot of those won't be long before Kristen starts seeing those lapping against the shores there.
That's right. I was watching the mass of those sailboats sitting there in the harbor, and they were rocking back and forth. So there's some unsettled water just right there in the bay there as well.
Well, as we mentioned, it looks like George has gotten a little better organized over the last few hours. And as we check the satellite picture out, of course, we're wondering now, where is it heading? We've got the watches up along the Gulf Coast, but what might influence the movement of George over the next 24 hours?
Well, we have a couple of interesting features. First of all, it's been on a very, very steady track. It's jogged up to the north a little bit, now jogging a little bit to the west, but we still think it's going to continue to move in this general west-northwest or northwest track the next 24 hours or so, and then be perched up in this area and then either go a little bit more west or a little bit more north. And exactly where that is right now, it's a little tricky because we have some upper level features that are still undefined and way away from the circulation in the mid latitudes that could affect it. But overall, the projected path is our uncertainty is either almost north or more west-northwest, and we think the best path is probably generally into the New Orleans area, the Gulfport, Biloxi area. That's probably the best guess right now.
I know the gambling ships there out the Mississippi Gulf Coast have been ordered to close down yesterday night, in time for the weekend. And as we look at the water vapor imagery, again, you were talking about the potential influences to this path.
Right. This upper-level trough over here in the west could move a little farther southeast, and that would keep Florida out of the loop there. I mean, Texas out of the loop, I'm sorry. But this dark area here is an east-west ridge of high pressure, and the farther west that goes, the farther west the hurricane is likely to go. Right now, we think it's going to retreat back and come up in the general New Orleans area, but it's too early to tell a pinpoint thing there. The radii are very, very large there, and everybody up there in the hurricane watch area should be prepared.
All righty. Thank you, Dr. Steve Lyons. The information on the hurricane, and we'll continue with updates top and bottom of the hour, but information available to you anytime on the internet at weather.com. So that's a look at the tropics. There's other weather going on this first weekend of fall.
Hurricane George is lurking in the Gulf of Mexico, and a very dangerous scenario could be setting up. Now, one of the areas that is bracing itself is Pensacola Beach, Florida. And that's what it looks like right now. We've been seeing a chance for some rough weather. And in just a minute, we'll have a live report from our very own Kristen Dodd. Good morning and welcome to Weather Center. I'm Cheryl Lemke. Now, as you just saw, Hurricane George is churning in the Gulf of Mexico. But on the mainland, there is record-breaking heat in the southern plain states and a chance for some severe weather today in the Midwest. And I'll have more on those stories coming up in just a moment. But first, let's turn to Bruce Edwards in the Forecast Center for more on Hurricane George. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Cheryl, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we continue our coverage of Hurricane George. Wreaked havoc on the Florida Keys, is now churning in the Gulf of Mexico, and the question remains, who's the next victim? And this hurricane that would not die and has not died and shows no signs of getting even any weaker over the next several hours. Here's a look at the satellite picture as we crank it up in the Gulf and put it into motion. Now, we do have the latest information as you look at the satellite picture from the National Hurricane Center. This is just in from the Hurricane Center, an update. And the position of George is 25.9 north, 85.1 west, or about 415 miles southeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. It is moving west-northwest now at about 10 miles per hour, expected to maintain this track today throughout the day. Maximum sustained wind still holding at 105 miles an hour, but we could see some strengthening later today as this continues to churn over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. That's it, the latest information here. Central pressure 974 millibars at the present time. As we continue here. Now, we want to show you the watches and warnings that are presently in effect. Now, this is where we have a big change in the latest update. Now, the hurricane watches still remain in effect from St. Marks, Florida, over to Morgan City, Louisiana. However, the Hurricane Center advises that this area, they could issue hurricane warnings later on this morning or this afternoon for at least a portion of this area. So, once again, we'll keep you updated on that. But right now, hurricane watch is in effect. Here's the good news for Florida. The tropical storm warning for all of the Florida West Coast and the Keys is discontinued. So this tropical storm warning, forget about it. It's discontinued. Small craft advisories are, of course, still posted around that area, and you should remain in port because the seas are still pretty rough there. At the present time. Speaking of rough, because the winds are still churning up a little bit. Dr. Steve Lyons joins us right now, and Dr. Lyons, good news for Florida, but again, as you said, the Gulf is still a little choppy for sure, and small craft, the ones that survived, George and the Keys, again, keep it in port today.
That's absolutely correct. You definitely don't want to venture out on the small craft anywhere along the west coast of Florida today. I'd stay in port or in the harbor or in the intercoastal waterway or anywhere inside wherever there are high waves, because the surf out here in the open Gulf of Mexico is very high. Buoy measurements just now in the last hour, 22 feet. And some calculations I just made on a wave model give the right front quadrant of the hurricane as it moves this way up to 30 feet or higher. So very, very heavy seas out there.
And again, good advice even to those up in the Florida Panhandle, the Northern Gulf. I mean, you might as well keep it in because conditions are going to get worse before they get better here with some choppy seas picking up as the morning wears on.
They will, and of course, the swell, no matter what happens to the hurricane, the swell will propagate up into the Florida Panhandle, and it'll be probably 10 to 12 feet at a minimum, no matter what happens to the hurricane.
As we see on the radar, we're still getting some rain through Key West and southwestern portions of Florida. Some of the storms appear a little heavy in the offshore waters here. So again, you're not out of the woods yet. We're still going to continue to get this messy weather for a while longer yet before they can really get down there in the Keys and investigate the damage that the system caused.
And of course, the circulation's just off the screen over here, and you can see how much faster these clouds are rotating as compared to these as you get closer to the center. That's an indication of how strong the system still is.
Well, the area that is of most concern with the movement of George right now is the northern Gulf coastal region. And we have the Weather Channel's Kristen Dodd stationed on the beach at Pensacola Beach, Florida this morning. Good morning, Kristen. How are things shaping up along the coast of North Florida?
Well, good morning to you, Bruce. It's actually a beautiful morning here along Pensacola Beach in the Panhandle of Florida. The sun, for the most part, is going to be out through the morning hours. We do expect the clouds to be on the increase. Already behind me, beginning to see a few of the fringe clouds that are wrapping around Hurricane George. The winds will also be picking up, and the waves will be picking up over the next 6 to 12 hours. We do have some new information, however, regarding the evacuations off of the islands here. The bridges will remain open to inbound traffic. That is the decision made this morning. Earlier, there had been talk that they would be shutting down at this hour to people coming back over. That is not going to be the case. So if you are living here on the barrier islands, including Pensacola Beach, you can rest assured at this point the bridges will remain open. However, we do have those evacuation orders in place, so now is the time to begin preparing your home as far as securing all of the outdoor furniture, bringing it in, and also boarding up your home. Here's a look at some of the counties that are under evacuation orders for the Florida Panhandle, and that does include Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, as well as Walton County, especially the low-lying areas. It's not just the coastal communities, but also more of the inland areas that are really low-lying and would be prone to flooding. In Alabama, we also have evacuation orders beginning in about 1 hour for Baldwin County, and that would include Gulf Shores and Pleasure Island. Folks there also need to begin boarding up and getting off those areas. Back to you, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Kristen Dodd, for that report. We'll check back with Kristen throughout the morning and watch conditions along the coast as they continue to develop or deteriorate as the case may be. Because, again, that's the big question. Where is George going? What kind of an effect will it have? Who's going to have brace for this? I mean, we remember Earl about a month or so ago went through a slow-moving rainmaker in Louisiana, and I'm sure folks are very, very concerned about George.
That's right, and that was a tropical storm for the most part. This is a hurricane that could potentially become a major hurricane, so they have to be very careful. And anybody in that hurricane watch area should be very concerned and be monitoring very carefully. Those farther to the west should be at least monitoring, not too concerned yet, but monitoring. You can see here on the water vapor imagery some of the features we've been looking at. There's dry air over in here that was basically entrained or moving into the system has caused the western side of the circulation to be a little less convective, less in the way of thunderstorm activity. There's a ridge of high pressure up in here that is a key element along with this trough in here on whether it's going to go more up here or a little farther to the west. And our best guesstimate right now is generally in the greater New Orleans area or just slightly to the east, but keep in mind that's still a long way out, and everybody in the warning area should be, or the watch area should be very, very cognizant of the situation.
That's right. It's still we've got a little ways to look at it yet, and a lot can change in that period of time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Steve Lyons, for that information. Thank you for joining us. We remind you that if you step away, do a little shopping, check on the internet to find out the latest information at weather.com to keep up to date on the latest.
And then right on that street. I don't remember the name of the street, but there's that shop on the corner. Okay. Then you take another left, and the road forks, but you go straight.
Straight? How can I go straight if there's a sugar shaker in front of me?
The road forks, but the main road is straight. Then you take a left, and then a right, and he's on the left, but you got to go around because it's one way. You can't turn that way.
Get out of here.
Experiencingthegardenstate.com now. How can you plan your day when you don't know what the weather's going to be like? I know people like to plan ahead for their day. I can help you out.
Right now, it's your local forecast on the Weather Channel.
This Storm Watch, sponsored by Home Depot. Thanks a lot for joining us. We have watched severe weather across the upper Great Lakes this morning and some cool autumn conditions and even a little mountain snowfall in the forecast for the west, including the mountains of Northern California. But on the tropical side of things, we have Hurricane George. Let's get an update on George, which is in the east central Gulf of Mexico at 25.9 north, 85.1 west. That puts the eye of George, by the way, the eye becoming much more evident, as I'll show you on the satellite picture, perhaps suggesting a sign of intensification. In any event, the center of George, 415 miles southeast of New Orleans, Louisiana, as of 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. Top sustained winds 105, and George continues to move west-northwest at 10. The central pressure 974 millibars. Hurricane watches posted now, St. Marks, Florida, westward to Morgan City, Louisiana. Hurricane watches meaning that hurricane conditions may develop within 36 hours. The tropical storm warnings have been discontinued from Longboat Key to Key Largo in Florida. Nevertheless, small craft obviously should remain in port until winds and seas subside. Here's the latest on Hurricane George via our colorized satellite picture. Look at the eye. You can plainly see it parked just about in the middle of the central dense overcast, which has actually become much more ominous looking during the last couple of hours. There was a kind of a lull in the storm's intensity overnight, but it would appear just by the signature on the satellite picture that intensification is taking place. Now, of course, we'll have a detailed update for you with our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons, at the top of the hour, and he'll let you know how much stronger he thinks George is going to get and where he thinks the second United States landfall will occur. Right now, it appears it probably will be somewhere along the north central Gulf of Mexico, but I'll let him pinpoint where he thinks landfall will be next time. Wind field with George, very large. Tropical storm force winds 350 miles across, and the swath of hurricane force winds about 130 miles across. So just don't focus on the eye wall or the center of circulation there. It's actually a very large swath of intense winds. George here, Eastern Gulf. 3 more hurricanes out in the Atlantic. There's Ivan, Carl, and Jean. And with all 4 of these hurricanes put together, this is the first time since 1893 that 4 simultaneous hurricanes have occurred in the Atlantic basin. Out to the western Pacific, tropical depression in the Philippine Sea, otherwise all's quiet. Intense storms, upper lakes, Upper level low out west. Snow levels will be flirting with some of the major highway passes in Northern California like Donner Summit during the next 24 hours. High pressure here means a hot day and perhaps another record-setting day of heat in Kansas and Oklahoma. Stay with us for more on that and, of course, a detailed update on Hurricane George at the top of the hour.
Tropical weather systems are affected by so many variables.
We constantly monitor the situation.
If someone is safer by watching the Weather Channel, that's what it's all about.
This program was sponsored by the Home Depot.
Home Depot is like 5 stores in one.
Home Depot's ideal really is to make sure the customer gets what they need.
This is not a little hardware store. We only have 5 of one type of thing. We have 100 of one.